I was born into Christianity. I was born into a Seventh Adventist family. So my whole life has been that of a Christian. I am the ninth of 11 children. So my dad and my mom were very busy, And my dad was a great Christian man. My mom as well. He instilled in me and in my siblings a love for righteousness, a love for God, a love for peace. And so when I came out from my family of origin and decided to study for the ministry and went ahead, that image of my father teaching us in the morning, patiently trying to instruct us in God's way, sometimes making decisions that we didn't like not allowing us to go to certain places and stuff like that, have all been impacting my life as I saw and I see now his wisdom. And when I became a father, I'm the father of 3 children, I kind of brought my father's sense of fairness, of listening, of teaching to my children. Like my dad would use everyday circumstances to teach us spiritual lessons. And I tried to do the same with my children. And in my marriage, well, the gentleness of my father rubbed off on me, so that in my 32 years of marriage, I've never even raised my voice at my wife. And I've tried to love her and nurture her as much as possible, so that we become one, so to speak. It's been like 35 years actually. I always felt that God had called me since I was a kid. I always loved going to church, praying, teaching. And there were a lot of members in my church who said, you should be a minister, because I would explain things so well. I was so active in church. And then I had an experience, one of those experiences where God saved you from your own mistakes. And at that point I decided, yes, I needed to stop running away and study for the ministry. Like Jeremiah, there are times when I say I'm not going to preach anymore, this thing is too painful, too difficult, but then like a fire in my bones, I find myself going back to ministry. I find myself wanting to stand and teach God's word. I find myself wanting to be a servant. So it's hard to be a pastor, especially in today's world. But God has promised grace, and if he has called one, you can't do anything else really. Normally, when one belongs to a denomination, especially like a Seventh Adventist church, you see pastoring in the context of being assigned to a congregation and taking care of all the needs of that congregation, administratively, planning, and that kind of stuff. You never saw yourself as a pastor outside of that box. But as I've grown, and even with Let Us Go Deeper, I see my role as a pastor as being a pastor in a church without walls, a pastor in a church that embraces multi-ethnicity, multiculturalism, and even embracing people of other faiths to come and find out this great everlasting gospel of Jesus Christ in these days. Wow, that's a loaded question in many ways. I would say that I'm still discovering. There was a time when I thought I had all the answers. I thought with my Seventh Adventist background, I knew exactly how the end would be. I knew exactly what the scripture said. But as I've been growing, listening, studying, I've found out that I didn't know as much as I thought. So right now, I would say I'm on a journey of discovery. I'm a seeker for truth that goes beyond simply what my denomination says, that goes simply beyond what I was taught in the seminary, but what does the scripture have to say? How does God speak to me, Inskip, in 2018? Let Us Go Deeper has been like the exclamation point to that journey, because it has allowed me to really go into the scripture and dig and to find out, is what we are teaching really true? And if it is true, how can I present it in a way that is practical, that reaches people where they live? So Let Us Go Deeper has been a great leap forward to me. It has really opened my eyes and my mind and allowed me to be, I would say, even daring. I have asked myself that question many times. Even when I've thought about writing my book, and I have about 3 books I've started writing, I never finished. My question is always, need for another book? What do I have to say that hasn't already been said by all these other writers and all these other ages? The same thing happens with Let Us Go Deeper. What do I have to say? What do we have to say? Well, I'll say this much. Even though I was born into a Christian home, lived my whole life as a Christian, I have struggled in my Christian life. There have been areas of my life that have just been giving me beans, so to speak. And I tell people, I am not one of your strong ones. You know, there are some people who are strong-willed. Your Daniels and your Joseph, who could run from temptation, who could conquer the enemy. Some of us, we don't have that. And so I have often asked myself this question, Lord, how can I be victorious? How can I get to know you? How can I live this life that I've read about, that I've heard about? How does the scripture apply to my life? And so whenever I read the scripture, I'm always reading to ask myself, Lord, how can I apply this that I, Inskip, can be like Daniel, like Joseph, can be strong and victorious? And I believe that's what we have to offer. A practical look at the gospel for those of us who struggle, so that the scripture will not just be something to talk about and to theorize about. It wouldn't simply be doctrines and practices, but a living reality, God's voice to us personally. That is what I see as our place. Let us go deeper. How can I let scripture be real and practical in my life? I would like Let Us Go Deeper to reach millions of you. I would love to see our podcast become a forum for honest, open biblical discussion, where people are discovering truth that goes beyond cultural, racial, denominational lines, and bring us into connection with each other, but more so connection with God and spirituality, authentic spirituality. If Let Us Go Deeper could do that, it would be well worth the time. I would say this was my calling. This is where God was leading me, even when He called me 35 years ago to enter the ministry.
I was born into a Christian family. I've grown up as an Adventist all my life, and there's always the sense that once you're born in a Christian home, you fall into a pattern and a sort of assumption of your faith. And I think as I've matured, I've had to really wrestle with some of the beliefs that I have. Those have made me really have some questions that I've not found good answers out anywhere. And I think Let Us Go Deep has provided a forum for me to really wrestle with those questions and tap into the experience of a seasoned pastor. I think in many ways Let Us Go Deeper has pressed me from both sides. It has pushed me to really question some of the assumptions that I had about my faith, but also strengthened some core beliefs that I've always held, and really refined them in a way that now gives me more confidence in them and more reason to keep believing in them. This is really what got us on this journey, because part of my struggle with the faith has always been, how does it apply? How does it fit in my life? What is its functional utility? And there are a lot of believers out here who are functional atheists. And I believe that in many ways I was a functional atheist, because the beliefs I had never in many ways translated to a lot of how I lived out my day-to-day experiences. And so I think that Let Us Go Deeper is part of those forums that I hope will be providing a relevance to scripture that is applicable to our day-to-day lives. We live in an age that is filled with information. And so the question now is, how do you make meaning out of that information? And even scripture, the Bible itself is just full of information. The question is, how do you make meaning out of that information? And I think Let Us Go Deeper, for me, has played a role of taking that dense text and really delivering gems that are practical and useful to my day-to-day living. One thing I'm learning as we have been doing Let Us Go Deeper is that the gospel is a very dynamic idea, a very dynamic reality, and it applies for all ages, for all people, in all situations. But I think there is always a need for people to recognize how the gospel applies for their situation, and not just co-opt what may have been believed by a given generation wholesale, because circumstances are changing, the culture is changing, the reality of our lives is changing, and we have to wrestle with the reality of how does the gospel fit into these new spaces, into these new environments that are being that are challenging the faith in many ways, and forcing us to think about how we practice our faith in maybe different ways and apply it differently. So as we went through this year, we have always wondered, do the numbers tell us a story about how successful we are being? We are just coming through our first year of doing the podcast, and I have had to really sit back and think about what this journey has been from the very beginning, because the whole idea that got us to even start doing the podcast was because I was enjoying the conversations I was having with Pastor, and I realized there was so much value for me, and I think what success looks like for me, for Let Us Go Deeper, is really, first of all, me growing and actually experiencing the power of the truths that will be developed as we discuss, but also seeing people engaging regardless of the numbers. If I have 10 people listening, but these 10 people are really engaging us and giving us feedback that is useful, I'll be much more fulfilled in that sense than having 1 million people but not really engaging, because I think our faith is a very interactive faith, and as much as we want to be dogmatic and obsolete in certain ways, we have to be open to the real questions that people may have about how the ideas we're presenting are impacting their lives and how they apply for their lives. And so for me, success looks like having an engaging community around this forum, that we are constantly bouncing ideas back and forth on, and really learning from our experience and seeing how is the faith they believe, how are these things that we're talking about, how are they looking at like in their lives, and what are they experiencing that may be meaningful even for us as the people. There are so many podcasts out there that are also trying to wrestle with these issues of faith. And when I got this idea of starting Let Us Go Deeper, I knew that I personally had a lot of things I was wrestling with. At my age and in the place I find myself, there were so many questions about what does believing in what I believe mean, and how does it apply? And I think these are questions that are true for a lot of our young people, for a lot of the young people my age and people younger than me. And I think the promise that we can offer, the promise that I can give our listeners, is that this will be a space that will not be shy about really tackling the real issues about our, the challenges we may be having with our faith, and the challenges we may be having with some of the aspects of our faith that we find to be difficult, we find to be maybe not applicable, we find to be in contradiction to some of other beliefs that we find out in the culture. But this will be a space that will be open enough and courageous enough to go into those discussions and trust that God will lead us to the truth.